Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where we're going to put our property experts to task answering your property related questions. But today we're going to have a little bit of a different format. We're going to have a one-to-one question time with our guest Simon Das, founder of 978 Group Finance and residential property investor. Simon is the go-to man about anything that's regenerative in the northwest of England, and we're going to look at the subjects of levelling up and how all that's progressing. So, Simon, welcome. Good trip down, I hope.
Yes, it was. It was absolutely fine.
So we don't need HS2 then?
From my reckoning, probably not.
No. I think the money could be better spent. Simon, I'm going to start off by asking you a question that's come in. The provision of enough housing seems to have stalled yet again. Do the panel think that there would be any improvement under a Labour government if they were successful at the next general election? And I guess this has been prompted by the Conservatives scrapping, I suppose, the housing targets. And let's just talk nationwide for a minute.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I think we need to build around 650,000 houses a year for the next 10 years to actually recover from the housing deficit that there is. And the target that Conservatives had was 300,000.
It was.
But the actual figures were sort of around about 200,000 a year for the last couple of years, is my understanding. So the Conservatives are clearly saying that they're not going to support the housing industry enough to hit that 300,000. Will Labour do a better job? From what I've seen, Labour have spoken about policies such as higher taxes to foreign investors, supporting first-time buyers, which to me is like reactive solutions. It's not going into the root of the problem. It's not getting involved in the centre of the housing industry and making an impact where it's really needed. It's like sticking a plaster on it or kicking a can down the road. So from what I've seen, the policy that Labour have spoken about is not going to have much of an impact. They're talking about a renters bill also, which is giving more rights to tenants and providing a large list of landlords, which just sounds like more crucifixion of landlords, which is ultimately going to push more landlords out of the market and make rental prices, rents go up. So I think they really need to get into the crux of the problem, look at planning reform, make it easier for developers to build quickly, for actually subsidise planning departments, pay for more staff to go into local authorities and get planning departments working faster and more efficiently. These type of things might see a proper increase in the levels of houses getting built.
I mean, Simon, I think you picked on some good points there. I mean, look, I get criticised for being a bit London-centric, and I'm sitting here in the centre of Canary Wharf. What do you expect, Yeah. But I mean, I've been involved with some developments down here, and I'm just looking at one out of the window here, where when we sold that, 70% was to overseas investors.
Okay.
Now, those overseas investors have actually been demonised by the government. They've been hit with higher stamp duty. Yeah. There's talk of them being penalised if they leave the properties empty and this sort of thing. And yet actually, they have provided a huge amount of buy-to-let stock for the rental market. And on top of which, they kept the construction industry going through some quite bleak times since 2010, 12. So I think the government really got to sit down and think what they want to do here. And I think again you touch on the new legislation. Really, I'm going to say against landlords, no fault evictions, for instance. I mean, we forget that in the late 80s. Assured short-held tenancies were brought in to make sure landlords could get their property back if they rented it, and that was the great new thinking of the moment, and it did provide a lot of housing stock, and now they're going in reverse on that.
Yeah, I think the abolition of Section 21 is really dangerous. It's just putting landlords off. There's many reasons why a landlord wants to take their property or needs to take their property back. They need that security that they know they can go ahead and do that. As for overseas investors. We work with a few who are bringing money into the UK, and they're providing high quality housing. In our instance, they are acquiring properties that are run down, bringing them up to much better standard, renting them competitively. So I can understand if people are buying huge swathes of these and leaving them empty, that needs cracking down on. But if they're getting let to the people who need to rent these properties, then I don't see penalising them further as really a way to solve the issue.
I mean, totally different subject, but it's rather similar in a way, isn't it? That the government took off the tax concessions for overseas visitors and tourists to buy goods tax-free from the big shops and all the rest of it. It just seems to me totally negative. You know, it was providing a lot of trade for the retail industry, and that's been killed, hasn't it? I just don't get the logic sometimes.
I really don't. To me, it smacks of sort of villainising certain groups, shirking responsibility a little bit, rather than the government going in and going, how do we fix this problem? They're kind of saying, who can we blame and take the eyes off us? I mean, maybe I'm cynical, but I'm not seeing well thought out policy that is really going to have a positive impact.
I just couple of things really. I mean, I'm very much against government interference in the market. I think the market will find its own levels if you allow it. I think the majority of developers, the majority of landlords are quite responsible and sensible people, and know that if they have good product, they'll get good results from that product in terms of their investment. But we have a government that seems to want to interfere and just make life terribly, terribly difficult for people who want to invest. I mean, again, with buy-to-let, I know you can't put a buy-to-let property in a pension, but there's nothing to stop that buy-to-let property being your pension.
Yeah.
And again, to me, that should be encouraged because it takes a weight off social services and all sorts of things, doesn't it?
Agreed, absolutely. Yeah, they seem to be interfering rather than going in and unlocking the bits of the system that are broken and allowing developers to do what they're good at. It's all this red tape and legislation that is ultimately causing developers to step out of the market, causing property prices to rise further and further, and making it less affordable for all involved. No wonder we're not building as quickly as we need to, because we need to know people are going to buy those properties at the end. With the cost of finance increasing, they need to be covered by residential or buy-to-let mortgages. They need to be affordable as well, and the government aren't remedying that at all.
I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, you can look out of that window there and you can see a block of apartments there that was getting towards £1 billion to build in terms of gross development value.
Yeah.
You start that today, you'll be frightened to death about the cost going up as you get halfway up, and you can't stop. So a number of developers around here in this area, certainly, I don't know whether it's the same in the Northwest, are saying, actually, we're going to put a freeze on this for the moment. We're not going to start digging the foundations because we don't know what the costs are going to be. We can't guarantee that the costs are going to be consistent over the next couple of years through the build programme. It's very difficult times.
Absolutely, yeah, I completely understand.
You know, again, we were talking off camera about some of the seaside areas. I know you're particularly keen, obviously, on the Morecambe area. I mean, I drive down to the seaside sometimes in the south here, and do you know what? I feel ashamed sometimes. The standard of the maintenance of the properties, the look of the seafronts. I mean, they're just terrible. I mean, we need to start investing in things that matter, things that show.
Absolutely.
Rather than funny railways that are no longer going to be super fast and are no longer going to come into London or do anything useful for the next 20 years.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just crazy, isn't it? We need a refocus, I think. Okay, well, look, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join us again after the break, and I'll be discussing more about levelling up and the property industry with Simon Dass. Hello, and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and I'm joined by Simon Dass. Simon, I've got a question in from somebody here who's an estate agent, and he says, I'm an estate agent in a relatively small town. and I'm becoming increasingly concerned about how long transactions take to move from reservation to exchange. The latest data on this is that it's taken on average more than 150 days, i.e. almost 6 months. What's the root cause of this? And whilst we do as agents spend as much time as we can, what can we do to speed the process up? It seems that lenders are to some extent to blame, as they're demanding higher levels of solicitor research before signing off loan applications. Do you think that's right?
Okay, yeah, I think there is a fair point in there. So the conveyancing process in the UK, it's been built over the course of hundreds of years, hasn't it, on a really solid legal framework, but it is somewhat archaic. There's a lot of moving parts as well. When you're doing the conveyancing of a house sale, you've got 2 sets of solicitors, you've probably got a bank involved, a surveyor for the actual valuation, possibly another surveyor for structurals and things like that. Then you've got the agent, you've got the buyer, you've got the seller. That's a lot of moving parts. I think over the last couple of years, obviously post-COVID, we saw this massive frenzy in the housing market, the bottleneck that had built up over COVID. When that popped, everyone went mad. And we were also at reduced capacity throughout all the professional services. People were sick with COVID, things had changed over that time period. People had started working from home a lot, which I think also reduced capacity, and new systems and processes were in place in banks and businesses that everyone was getting used to. We're still, when we look at banks now, the service level agreements that are in place, and their timeframes, some of them are back to pre-pandemic levels, but a lot are still not quite there. You've got the same type of frustrations in the conveyancing practices themselves. I notice a number of my solicitor contacts are saying it's very hard to recruit at the moment. So I think recruitment in all these professional services is another issue.
Well, it's a good point you raise there. I mean, one of the answers that we've had to this question in the past is that apparently it's less than 1 in 4 solicitors actually have a full-time conveyancer.
Wow.
So when you know the family goes into the family solicitor and says, I want to buy this house, I want to sell this house, actually they're getting a partner probably that's not used to, on a day-to-day basis, doing conveyancing. So they might be a little bit behind the game. They might be a little bit behind the game on where to go for their searches, in particular certain things, you know, like contaminated land or environmental agency searches, that sort of thing, and that can slow things down tremendously, and that's a result of COVID, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. And you mentioned searches. I think, you know, local authority searches, I think this process itself is it's just outdated. Ultimately, what they're looking for on these searches is a set of data points relating to a postcode, relating to a property. Now, all that data's out there. Why it can take a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks to get these data points collated is beyond me. It really needs digitising properly so that you can get an instant report.
Well, do you know what I'd like to see on that? I'd like to see Land Registry take all that on. I'd like it to be funded by solicitors or whoever, paying a licence fee to the land agency. Okay, and you could get all your information there. So, you know, environmental agency, they can register their stuff with Land Registry, so can everybody else, contaminated lands, councils, everything. And it would just be a one-stop shop.
Yeah, that would make perfect
be
sense.
Amazing, wouldn't it?
It really would. It would transform the industry. I mean, I work with quite a few investors from Europe, from Sweden, and the conveyancing process over there is drastically different to what we have over here. So if an offer is accepted on a property, usually they'll have keys within a week or 2 weeks maximum. And the underwriting is basically done before the property goes on the market. So every property has a pack associated with it, with all this information in, the likes of searches and also things like regular maintenance that's been completed, any upgrades and refurbishment, all that stuff is there. And so I think we need to think about the process as a whole. And digitising it would be a good start if possible.
I think you're right, and I think the key problem is that we've been doing this for 100 years, like we've been doing it, and times have changed. I also I think we have to be careful. We mustn't forget that one of the reasons the UK and London in particular is very popular with overseas investors is because our laws are safe. Our conveyancing is safe. So we mustn't compromise that. But I mean, you're right, digitisation would be the answer, wouldn't it? And if we're going to get involved in AI, I'm sure we could probably just send the questions off and get the answers back within a couple of minutes.
Absolutely, imagine that, eh?
that would be super, wouldn't it? Okay, all right. So we'll move on. Simon, I want to discuss with you the government policies of what they call levelling up.
What they call?
Well, you see. So somebody criticised me the other week because I was sort of saying, look, I don't think 20 million quid into a town is actually going to do very much at all. Okay. The way money's spent these days is not. And I flippantly said that, look, I've got friends that own houses in London that are worth more than 20 million quid. So what that's kind of going to do for a town, I just really don't know. Fair and point. I just think a lot of this is window dressing. Now, where you are in the northwest, and particularly in that Morecambe area, you're undertaking some really super projects, aren't you? You've got the Eden project coming along. You've got regeneration across the town. Tell us a little bit about that and where the money's coming from.
Okay, so levelling up. There's the levelling up fund, of course, which I think is pretty much what the government equates levelling up to be, which I believe so far is 4.8 billion. They have decided to distribute amongst northern towns and cities for various projects. It's not a lot of money. Sounds quite a lot to most lay people, but it's not a lot of money. In Morecambe, we have successfully bid, the council have successfully bid along with Eden project for £50 million from the Levelling Up Fund, and that will go into Eden Project North, which is a £120 million project. It will bring 1 million visitors a year. It will pump 2 billion into the local economy over the next 20 years. So there's a lot of value there for that 50 million. It's not to be sniffed at. There needs to be more and more of these projects that will be catalytic, and they will really transform these microeconomies of the towns that they're in. So I don't want to be flippant about that, but when you then look at things like HS2, which is meant to be this big levelling up project, it's an absolute farce.
Well, hold on a minute. I think what are we at? About 140 million pound budget.
Billion.
It started off at 25 billion, right? It's now not going to come into London until 2040 at best. So it's stopping way out of London. They're slowing the trains down so that that there's less requirement in track expenditure.
What?
It's not going where it was originally designed and promised to go. I mean, this is just classic government waste, isn't it?
It is ludicrous. Imagine the good you could do with that 140 billion. Forget the high-speed train link. It's not high speed anyway. It's not on the likes of the scale of Japan's Maglev and stuff. If you want a futuristic train system, do it properly. We'll be in flying taxis by 2040. There is literally no point.
Are you sure?
Well, if you take a leaf out of Dubai's book, I mean, private ones maybe. So it's ludicrous. We don't need to be in London 20 minutes faster. Londoners don't need to be in Manchester 20 minutes faster, not with business operating as it does nowadays, over phone calls, video calls, the internet. Put a load of that money into full fibre broadband for the whole of the UK. Do things like that are going to have a real lasting positive impact. This is such a waste of money. Plus, it's destroying the environment. It's absolutely ludicrous.
I mean, I like what you're doing in Morecambe. I really like that because you've identified and given permission to serious projects that are worthwhile, that are educational, that are a real contribution to the community and to visitors alike. What I worry about is there's 20 million going into towns and just people scratching their heads. What shall we spend this on? And you'll be coming up with the most ludicrous ideas, wastes of money. You know, we had all this with 106 agreements when you do property development. I mean, I had one down the road there. They made us spend, I think it was £50,000 on a water feature, which I don't think ever worked anyway. You know, it's just wasting money and putting the price of stuff up without any purpose.
They need to be really careful. They need to seek valuable projects that are going to have a real positive impact, that are run by specialists, like by people who know what they're doing. The councils are there to distribute the funds, but they've not got the expertise to create viable regenerative projects. So we need to be careful on where that money's going, and scrap HS2 instantly and find another place for that pot of cash. Right,
well, on that happy note, that's all we've got time for. So a big thank you to Simon Dass from 978 Group Finance. Thank you very much for coming in today. Great input to the programme. Thank you. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.